Hey, everybody, it's Honesty, and this is it. This is the Right Honesty podcast, and this is the very last book so far of the Connecticut Kings. We have gone through all of them, including the two new releases, and I'll put links to everything in the show notes for this episode. Attorney General, how you doing?
I am great. I am sad to be leaving our beloved Connecticut Kings behind, but boy, what a ride it's been, right?
Yes, yes. It was so much fun to go back.
Yes, yes. This world that CCJ and Love Belvin created, right? These stories, these characters, two different writing styles, but eight just incredible stories, including, Trent and Jade's part one and part two.
Mm-hmm.
But I was reflecting on that earlier today, just what a gift they gave us, right? And I'm so glad that they came together again to give us two more books, right?
Yep.
And everything's not all peachy keen, because I think in most of the other books, the Kings were riding high, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or riding higher. And here we've got the Kings rebuilding and experiencing some of that as well. And I just loved it. So
No, I totally agree. And thinking back on all of them, it makes sense um, that we would find the Kings at a low point because no,
yep,
even with dynasties, they
that's
have
right.
they have years where they have to trade people, people retire, people get
Yep,
hurt, you have
yep,
rebuilding years, and so it completely makes sense that it wouldn't be a straight line up.
absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. And I appreciate that, right? Because to your point, no dynasty lasts forever. Everybody goes through rebuilding phases, and everyone has some stuff that happens,
Yep.
right? Because while it happens off page, and it's right after Sloane and Nate's story, but certainly, before we meet Lons and Nye and Ambrose and
Mm-hmm.
Tegan, right? You've got the coaching shenanigans, which it was like, oh
Right.
my goodness, right? I
Yep.
mean, some real craziness going on. Like I'm side eyeing Coach Lou now as I, go
I
back and
know.
read the older books. I'm like, Coach Lou, really?
Exactly. Why would you behave this way?
Right, right.
For sure.
So
Yeah, no,
yeah.
it did see reading Nye's book and um Tegan, whew, Tegan and Ambrose. I was like, well, I had a little brain moment. It definitely made me want to go back and be like, what did I miss? Because everybody,
Right.
this didn't come up, but also that like when authors are building a world, they don't always know all the details when they start, and
Right.
so it to me is completely believable and okay that maybe those things would either just be coming to light like in terms of the public view as much as
Yes.
they were just coming to light for the authors that were like, okay, well, which way we gonna go with this chat, because we done turned it every which way we can turn it. So
Right. And we've noted several times how there are elements of these stories that definitely tie into realistic situations, right? Because we've all seen situations, maybe not necessarily in our personal lives, but certainly with celebrities, right? Where people are, something comes out about them and they're years into whatever their respective field was, right? And people are all aghast and, clutching their proverbial pearls over this revelation.
hmm
And say, oh my God, I would have never expected, I never thought, I never knew that so and so was behaving this way. So,
hmm
with Coach Lou and Coach Nealon, I think was the second coach that was trying to sleep with players, wives and girlfriends
right.
and baby mamas. And talk about being messy, boy. Whew.
hmm
At least Coach Lou was paying for it, right?
exactly.
I mean, you know.
No, exactly. No, I'm totally with you on
So
that. um so once again, I don't have an overview. Part of that is because I was half busy this weekend, so I'm excited to report to anybody who's interested that I am renovating my bathroom. Thank the Lord. And so we were at all the different places looking at fixtures and all that stuff this weekend. So while I did review, I don't have an overview. But if I had to make one up, I would say um, Sloan let him in.
Yeah.
That is the overview. Girl, let him in. What are you doing?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
we're going to start with you as always. How did you walk away? What were your impressions?
Um, Something that I've said before, but I think it bears repeating. I think it takes skill to write an unproblematic couple
Yeah.
that is still interesting and
Hmm.
engaging to read about.
Yeah.
I think that skillful authors do it in such a way that it comes across so natural. Um, but I think if you've ever read a couple and they were that unproblematic, right? And you're like, this is fine, it's fine, it's okay, it's
Hmm.
fine, right? But they were kind of dull, right? So the story is, yeah, you wanted good things for them, but you weren't really invested. And I think, just credit to CCJ once again for giving us a couple that they were not problematic, right? Individually and as a couple, they were unproblematic. And yet I was very, very invested in their story. I was invested in them individually, and engaged from beginning to end, you know. And so I just wanted to acknowledge that again, because I don't think that is as easy as it comes across to the reader, right? We
Hmm.
just kind of take for granted that, an author can just weave this story, and that these characters jump out from the page and grab you, and you're like, yes, I'm interested in you, without all of the drama and whatnot internally and whatnot. Whereas these were
Yeah.
two people who, they weren't perfect, right? But they
Hmm.
were whole, they were fully formed. Um, and I was all in for them, and I got them both. I got them both. There were definitely parallels, I think, between Will and Ramsey, and
Yeah.
also between Cole and Jordan, right? And so I think another thing that we saw come up was the problem of perception as it pertains to women, right? And just as Cole was legitimately concerned about the blowback when, if and when she and Jordan became public knowledge, Sloan was also very legitimately concerned about the perception, because she was already dealing with a perception problem, right?
Hmm.
Because she was breaking barriers, and already blazing a trail that no other woman had done. And, society has its opinion about, you know, swim lanes for men and swim lanes for women. And here was Sloan decisively, in the swim lane designated for men, manly men at that, right? Football is the manly sport,
Right.
right? And then on top of that, she got the nerve to be sleeping with a man who's 13 years younger than her, and her boss's son,
Right.
her boss's son.
Right. 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 Right.
Um, So, and I mean, look, just as Cole's concern was legit, Sloan's concern was also very, very legit. And candidly, Sloan had more to lose even than
Yeah.
Cole did.
Yep. Because
So I
Cole had the
got it.
safety net of being related. So
Exactly.
her life,
Exactly. Right.
she was still, yeah.
And Cole wasn't the first, right? Cole wasn't the first woman, to be in a behind the scenes front office role on a football team, right?
Hmm.
So, but to be on the coaching staff, that's different. And I
Right.
think about, the news today. There was, I'm blanking on which team she's on, but a Black woman who did recently get hired, in one of the coaching positions, and I think it might be strength and conditioning or something.
Hmm.
But I remember seeing it several months ago and saying, "God, this reminds me of Sloan Brooks," right? I think we're seeing it more so in basketball, where several former WNBA players are on NBA coaching staffs. And in
Right.
fact, I think one, Becky Hammon, is allegedly interviewing for the head coaching positions for 2 NBA teams, which, if that is true, that is historic, right? Because that's never happened before.
Yeah.
So the parallel, I think, not just to a prior Connecticut King story, but also, again, pulling elements from real life, even though Sloan and Nate's story is, from several years ago. So
Hmm. Yeah, I was team Nate. Um, I understood why she was pushing him away, but I still just wanted her to I wanted her to be, and I know it's not realistic based on the world that things are set in, because the world of the Connecticut Kings is kind of adjacent to our world. So there's still patriarchy, there's still chauvinism, there's still,
mm-hmm.
all of these other things that were going to make her life harder. But and she did. She came around as soon as she could. But, well, actually, no, she didn't, because they had 4 years of a sexual relationship where it's something to keep somebody at arm's length for 4 years. And so I a little bit was like, damn, how do you do that? Like, and it made it seem as if he dated on, he dated and kind of did his thing. He wasn't 100% pining for her, but I was interested in, and not that they were together every weekend, or anything. It was kind of like when our schedules match up when we're in town. But that for me was like, girl, like, you don't know by now that he is consistent or certain, because she was like, she wants certainty. I think that's what she says.
Yeah.
Um, so that was for me a little bit like, okay, I got it. I got it. I don't want to pretend that I don't get it, because, like you said, and I think, like we talked about in Love on the Highlight Reel, that if Cole never meets JJ, she becomes Sloan. Like, maybe she takes over for Eli. Maybe she, you know what I'm saying? Like, and
Mm-hmm.
becomes one of those owner operators or owner managers, like the godforsaken owner of the Washington football team, that will not get out of the business. And I'm ready for, but anyway, that's another
Mm-hmm.
conversation. But she could have. I think her trajectory probably could have been a straight line, and not that it still won't be, because now that we know that if they have Richardson Sports Management, like, there's no question that she's going to take that as high as it can go. Nate is no slouch, but I definitely get more like driven, frantic, lean in energy from Cole.
Yeah.
Um but I was surprised to see. So, like, all that to say that I understood where Sloan was coming from, like you said, but I was surprised to see that nowhere in the preceding 4 years did she let him in past the stolen moment.
So can I push back on,
Oh, Lord.
hold on the characterization of arm's length?
Okay.
Because I don't think the way that they both characterized what was going on, and I understand that the way she sometimes characterized it sounded a little like that. And then there were other times, and I think it's Nate that says, all I'm asking is that we continue to do
Yeah.
what we've been doing.
Yeah.
So that doesn't say arm's length to me. That says she refused to give it a title,
Hmm.
and she refused to attach a future expectation to it. That was more so, that was how I interpreted it.
I
Because
agree, but I think
arms,
that's arm's length, though. I mean, if you're not willing
well,
to
well, but
plan for the
see,
future.
let me continue my line of thought on this, because one of the things that struck me was that Nate knew her and she knew him, right?
Hmm.
So we see the concrete proof that Nate knows his woman in the way that he handled the heart attack emergency,
Right.
right? That he called a private ambulance so that there would be discretion, that he had the presence of mind to text Coach Underwood as if he was Sloan.
Mm-hmm.
right? That he knew not to contact family or close friends because he knew she would not want them to know in the moment, and he was going to leave it to her to decide who and when she told.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then, afterwards, in the days after, showing up with just the right amount of pressure, right? To go out on the walks and so on and so forth. So Nate knew his woman. And the flip side of that, the way we see that Sloan knew him better than I think maybe we might have been getting the impression earlier on, was when he said, well, I'm going for my licensing exam, right? And she jumped right in on that, and she knew exactly what he was talking about and what he wanted. They had those conversations and so on and so forth. I just think that she would throw up the wall when it came to the topic of putting a label on things and or talking about the future. But to me, it seemed clear that they were not just sharing um, bodies and time and space when they were together, right? They were clearly sharing dreams. They were clearly sharing insecurities. And because he also said that he understood why, not just on the job front, but I believe there's a point where he's reflecting and he understands also because of what happened with Garrett and whatever the case may be, why she continues to say to him, oh, we're just having fun until you find some pretty young thing to give chocolate
Mm-hmm.
babies and so on and so forth. But I think that he always saw through that, right? And I think rather than fixating on that, he chose to continue throughout the 4 years of them just being together.
Mm-hmm.
And it also didn't sound like, to me, I thought one of Sloane's again, giving credit to CCJ, because Sloane could have come across as unlikable at a
Yeah,
certain point,
she
right?
did to me. Yeah.
So I she didn't cross that line for me, but I could definitely see it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because I felt like Sloane stayed just on the line before she crossed over into annoying. And I think that's because I understood where she was coming from. She might have joked one too many times, but it didn't come across to me as like, all right already, girl, my goodness. I
Yeah.
didn't feel that way, but I could understand if other people did. I that personally wasn't my reaction to it.
Well, I think unlikable is strong for me. So it was more
Okay.
like, I don't know that I ever found her unlikable. I was always rooting for them to be together, and I certainly never wanted her to be stabbed. I think what I am projecting is him tolerating her repeated rejection. And I guess for him, 4 years in, he, like you're saying, he knows her well enough to take that with a grain of salt because she keeps answering him.
Right.
So
Right.
she keeps calling him back, or whatever the case may be. And even though we don't get it on the page, I'm sure they talked about her applying for that job because it was not a surprise to him.
Right. Right.
And what that was going to look like. So I think by the time he is saying to her, "You are who I want. Stop bringing this other girl up," and then he eventually does give the other girl the time of day, and we see Sloane like start to feel a way about it. All of that to me was completely predictable and
Mm-hmm.
avoidable. Like I think that's what I'm saying. I feel like she could have handled it like differently. Like she was trying to have her cake and eat it too. When he was kind of lost in the balance, or could have
Mm,
been lost in the balance.
interesting.
So it came
Okay.
across as a little bit like self-ish, but also quite necessarily self-protecting because of where she
Mm-hmm.
wanted her career to go.
Mm-hmm.
So I got it, but by the time he's like, "Will you stop?" Like it's kind of like, "Yeah, girl, like come on," because the heart attack is what keeps him. If she doesn't have the heart attack, I believe they break up for real this time. The heart attack is what keeps him in her life because he's the only one that knows about it for a period of time. Because
Right.
the night before, I think it was like, this is going to be, or even that morning, I think it was, this is going to be the last
Yes.
time, and blah, 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 blah.
Yes.
And so it doesn't end up being the last time, and we understand why. So if not for that life event, which kind of like what we get from Parker and Rhett, but for Rhett having these life events that kind of shake him awake, if not for
Yeah.
that, I'm not sure I think she would have put her career, and rightly so, ahead of this relationship that she knew to be meaningful, but also didn't allow herself to put full stock in. And I never could latch on to why, other than his age, why didn't she let herself put full stock in it at year 2.5 or 3? Because now we're at year 4, like, and even without the job in the picture, it's still kind of like I need certainty. So, and I've never dated anybody 13 years younger than me, especially as a woman. And that has its connotations, and people make their assumptions about that because it's very different when women date younger than when men date younger. So I
Yeah.
think like I keep saying, I understood it, but I felt like I wanted her to handle it a little more with his feelings in mind.
So that's interesting because on the one hand, I I think there's a good chance that they part if she doesn't have the heart attack, but I believe that they would have been drawn back together no matter what, right? And
Probably, yeah,
I'm thinking about the last time that they met up, right? Like he made the comment to her in the office and she's like, "We'll come by tonight." Right.
right,
So she has started the job. They are on site, right?
yeah. And she talked about
And
being lonely.
yet and
Hmm.
still. So I think it with that in mind, I feel like that kind of it was like, yeah, because he's more than just someone you've been sleeping with and spending time with occasionally for the past 4 years, right?
I
You
know
don't
what it
want to
is.
stay away from him, right?
I wanted her to say the words.
I get it.
Yeah.
I completely get it. I completely get it. And then what I found interesting about the heart attack was that that was her moment of reflection and that they had just had the conversation about certainty. And remember what I said, and I don't remember which book we were talking about. It might have been at the very beginning with Trenton and Jade about the peacetime spouse and the wartime spouse, right?
Yeah, that was
And how Nate,
Will and Ramsey. Yeah, Will and
okay,
Ramsey.
Nate showed himself to be both, right?
Mhm.
With the heart attack.
Mhm.
Demonstrated his ability to step up and be what she needed in the moment without hesitation, to handle things exactly how she would have wanted them to be handled, right? Because that's how well he knew his woman.
Mhm.
And she does, right? It's several weeks later where she reflects and she says to him, "You gave me that." Because I was like, okay, let's give credit where credit is due, right? Because he kept his wits about him and not just handled things, but handled things exactly the way that you would have wanted him to handle things, right?
Mhm.
Because if he had deviated on some of those things, I think any of us could have understood if he had called, her girlfriend Joan or this one or that one to make sure that a family member knew, right? I think we all would have been like, well, I can understand why he did that, but he knew her well enough to know that is not what she would have wanted him to do.
Mhm.
And so it was I like the way that was done, kind of having that looking mortality in the face and
Yeah.
reflecting and being like, oh, I need to reevaluate some things, and this
Yeah.
person has been here delivering exactly what I told him I needed, but behaved as if that was not something he was prepared to give me right now.
Mhm.
And in fairness to Sloan, so this story made me think about Ashton Kutcher and Demi Moore, right?
Hmm.
Because I can remember when they were together, right? And Bruce Willis, right? And they were doing this whole blended family thing, kumbaya, we love
Mhm.
each other, right? And everyone was making this big deal again, right? Because Ashton Kutcher was significantly, 20 something years younger than Demi Moore. They were making it work, this amazing love story. And if the rumors are to be believed, then part of the breakdown of that marriage was the inability of her to have more children, right? That they had
Right.
tried and tried and tried, and it wasn't successful. And they go their separate ways. He got caught cheating. They go their separate ways. He ends up with Mila Kunis. They have kids, right? So with that in mind, it was a reminder that what people want can change, and I understood, to use the phrase self-protecting, right? Sloan thinking to herself, yes, right now, 26 to 30, right, you're saying you don't want children, right? But I have a definitive clock and I am done. My kitchen is definitively closed. You don't have the same kind of clock, which means you can change your mind. And, you've got literally decades to change your mind. And it's happened, right?
Yeah.
Eli's cancer scare could have just as easily tipped Nate in the opposite direction, right? Of saying, oh my God, I'm being faced with my father's mortality. It's made me think of my own. Now I want to create legacy, you know? And I think that is as over it as Sloan appeared and as cool a relationship that she had with Garrett before he showed his entire ass, right? There was still clearly wounds from what happened in that marriage, right? And still clearly baggage from having the trust betrayed and the fidelity just out the window, and feeling like she had poured her heart and soul into this man and had not given him a reason to do the things that he did, and he did it anyway. So I definitely felt like, to a certain extent, and it wasn't intentional, but like you find people how you find them, right? You get them how you get them. That Nate was absolutely, because remember, if we're reading the timeline right, they meet a year after her divorce, right? Or within the year that her divorce is finalized, it is the first time they meet. So this whole time that they've been dealing with each other was on the heels of her divorce, right? This after and it didn't sound like the divorce itself was nasty, but certainly the breakup, because of the way it happened, right, was nasty and awful, and she was publicly humiliated and all that stuff. So I think we have to keep that in mind as well, right? That like when we meet Sloan at 43, Sloan is 5 years removed from her divorce, but Nate's been in the picture
4 of those years
since a year post-divorce, So I'm sure that undoubtedly that was part of it as well, right? It wasn't a personal thing against Nate, but it was just like, okay, I've got this little young tender,
right?
And I just finished dealing with a man who had community peen, even though I was his wife, right? So wouldn't I expect a late 20-something to, he's having fun, but thinking longer term. I'm not an option for him longer term, because he's going to want things that I am no longer interested in giving a man longer term.
Yeah, I can see that. I think by then, I just wanted her to have said the words by then. I think okay. I feel like she was blaming it on him. She was saying, which is very Cole and Jordan, and I was Team Cole, but now I'm Team Nate, so I don't know. But she kept saying, like, and didn't keep saying, because it had one conversation with this in it, but her comment to him was, and it sounded as if she had said it to him before, was that she wanted certainty. And so whenever he would ask her why it couldn't be more, why it couldn't be different, why was she constantly diminishing the depth and the nature of their relationship, what we see her say is that she wants certainty, but that even though he's been consistent all that time, but if what you're saying is true, and it is entirely possible that it is, then the issue was her and not him.
Yeah.
But it was like she was blaming it on him. And to Nate's credit, knowing what he wants and being very much determined to get it, it felt as if he never had the benefit of her being honest about the way she felt, until he actually went on a date And she was like, okay, well, come back. Don't talk to her no more.
Yeah, and what I also think is interesting is I don't think she would have reacted that way. I don't think she would have allowed herself to react that way towards him if not for the heart attack, right? I think that
Absolutely.
had because she kind of said that she either says it or she thinks that she assumed, right, that over the 4 years that he was doing him,
Right, right,
and she just didn't press it. And I think that even if she felt a way, she would have said, not the tenor of what you have going on with him here, so you need to tuck that away. You
right.
don't let that rear its ugly head, because you said to him, this is
Yeah.
what we are, and we are not, but we're not this.
Hmm.
So get yourself together, right? I feel like she would tough on herself to not let it go there. But whereas after the heart attack, she was having her own, Sloan Brooks, this is your life
Yeah.
kind of
Yes.
reflecting. And it was like, ooh, you know what? On second thought, no,
Right.
I don't want that at all. And I do. I was glad that in that moment she did act her age, right?
Yeah.
And didn't it wasn't this kind of petty or start an argument with him. She came clean, right? Because I was
Hmm.
like, please handle this the right way, right? Because
Hmm.
you've been the one, like, she was self-aware that she was the one that was like, no, we're in this box, stay in the box, stay in the
Right,
box.
right.
And now her feelings had changed. And I was glad that it handle that the right way instead of some nonsense, because
Yeah,
listen, just because you are of a certain age doesn't mean that you are always the bastion of maturity. But in that
absolutely.
instance, Sloan was, right.
And I think it was a what matters most moment. I think having the heart attack was very much like, oh ho ho.
Yeah,
Because she says when she's lying in the bed, he says to her, you have to be mindful of your limitations. And she says, I don't have limitations.
yeah,
And
yeah.
so I think the heart attack and then the days and the weeks that happened after it, it was it was for her a time of like, huh, okay, so I guess I do not
And
control the wind
how
and the
could it not
rain.
be, right? Right.
Right,
And how could
right.
it not be, right? Because you have that kind of incredibly terrifying event,
Yes, yes.
right? I don't care what age you are, right? How do you not step back and reflect on that? And especially, she's saying, she, exercised, she took excellent care of herself, and it still happened to her. And, family history with her mom and all of that. So, it was almost like, how dare a heart attack try and jump on me,
No,
not try,
honestly.
successfully jump on me, right? At 40, like,
Yeah,
who do you think you are, heart attack?
that's
You
exactly
know?
what happened.
Yeah. And you contrast that, right? Not exactly apples to apples, but you contrast that with Eli, right? And his situation, right? Where, yes, he became reflective, but then he went about handling things all just, Jesus, like, oh, could you have made a bigger mess of this,
Yeah.
sir? I mean, really.
No, for real.
It's
Like,
like,
what are we
it's
doing here?
like, yeah, it's like, why don't you, completely, like, court a lawsuit, alienate your son, take off your
Right.
wife? I mean, why don't
So
you take
let's
off your
get
daughter
into
while you're at
Eli.
it?
Yes, let's get
Yeah,
into Eli
yeah,
because up to this point, we see him, he gets on our nerves a little bit with Parker. But in general, he was very cool about Cole and Nate. No, no,
yep,
no, that's not true. Cole and JJ
yeah,
on the plane ride back, and what those conversations were, and was very attuned to Cole in terms of like I knew something was going on, and the
yep,
necklace and everything. So in the first book, Eli's cool. We don't have no real problems with Eli. When he comes to Parker's house and Parker has to get him together, I start to question him a little bit, but in general, I'm like, all right, you know what I'm saying? Because
right,
his loyalties are split. He's thinking about Jimmy and, somehow feeling paternal or protective of a Parker, but only because of Rhett. And the
right,
fact that Rhett doesn't fit the mold and seems to be a troublemaker. Um, But in this book, and we find out why. We find out that it's because he has cancer and he's got all these concerns, and he has a very young daughter. His in a May December relationship with Mel, and but he really, like, aside from what was her husband's name? Her ex-husband, Grant,
Garrett.
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 Aside
Hmm.
from Garrett, Eli, and even more so than Garrett, Eli is really the villain of this story. By the because by and I don't villain is too strong because he's not a Brielle or somebody that is just like over it, but he or even like Ezra's father, he's not even that far, but he
Right.
still turns out to be a problem for Nate that I didn't foresee, just like
Yeah.
Garrett turns out to be a problem for Sloane.
Yeah.
And we don't, and I didn't see until she says, "Oh, this fight ain't over." I didn't see, I didn't see it coming. Um,
Yeah, I agree with you, and I know we'll get into the Garrett issue in a second. With Eli, I loved when Sloane said to him, "The hypocrisy is thick." Right? It's
yes,
like you married a woman who's 25 years younger than you, and you have the unmitigated audacity, right, to stand in my face,
right.
and talk foolishness, and because having concerns is one thing,
Mm-hmm.
right? Fine, but but his reaction and the way he chose to handle it was just like, wow, wow. I mean, do you I'm sure you have a team of lawyers that would have told you this is a
Yes,
horrible idea, this is absolutely horrible. Right? I thought
yes,
it was funny when it was Nairi, his executive assistant, that was like, please get this right before she sues us to Kingdom Come, like, get yourself
yeah.
together.
Where are you at?
Right. So it was, when we get the cancer diagnosis, the fact that it was more aggressive than they thought, the surgery, you're like, okay, this is why he had taken complete and utter leave of his senses.
Yes,
I did think, going back to the initial conversation that Nate has with him about the licensing exam, right? When that results in him telling Nate to get out his house. He's like, well, if you don't want my legacy, you don't need to be eating my food. And I
right.
was like, really? Really?
Really?
We just
Yes,
going full on Tyler Perry, super dramatic, huh?
yes.
Okay, fine. But that reminded me of Will's father. Will's father was I say remind, right? Just kind of in terms of the parallel of, look, I'm not going to apologize
Right.
for trying to make the way easier for my child, for building legacy, for building wealth. And, while Will took issue with the way that Jack went behind her back and, greased palms at the network, it was clear that he didn't, he intervened, right? But he didn't go
Mm-hmm.
so far. And he still heard his daughter,
Yeah.
right? He still heard what she had to say. He knew where she was coming from. He wasn't dismissive of that. We talked about that. Whereas Eli was kind of like, I hear you, but I'm not hearing you,
Mm-hmm.
right? I was like, I hear the words coming out of your mouth, but I don't hear what you're actually saying, and I don't want to hear what you're saying. And Nate's point was so well taken, because he's like, you raised go-getters,
Mm-hmm.
you raised ambitious children. Like, why are you now surprised that these ambitious go-getter children that you raised want to go get?
Right.
Right?
Their own thing, or can
Yeah.
see beyond the horizon that you set.
Yeah, and why are you behaving as if this is like a personal betrayal, as if we've decided to, take the knife and plunge it into your chest? It was a
Mm-hmm.
very, again, once we find out about the cancer diagnosis, you're kind of like, okay. But it was a very, like, dramatic, and with all due respect to the Aries, as my cousins would say, it was a very Aries reaction, right? Aries are
Mm-hmm.
known for being, drama queens, kings, and so I wondered if Eli was an Aries, because I was like, wow, this is like, you've gone completely off the reservation with this one,
Yeah.
and glad that he reined himself back in. But the way that Sloane handled that conversation, I was like, yes, Yes, that's right.
Yeah, she did it
Remind
right.
him he's dealing with a grown ass woman here,
Right.
right? Like,
You know what am thinking about? Did we? I'm sure we did, but in no great depth. When did we hear about Eli in the last two books? Just that he's alive. Did we revisit
correct.
the cancer diagnosis? I don't think so.
No,
Okay.
no, we didn't. We
Okay.
didn't.
Then well, he all right then if he's still if
Yeah,
he's still
presumably he's
kicking.
fine because there's
Yeah.
no indication, right, in either book that I don't remember if either one explicitly state, but we know he's still the owner. I don't think he has any talking lines in either book, if I remember correctly. I don't remember. Um, Trent might have referenced having a conversation with him, but I think that was it.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. You're right. You're right. Okay. So let's see. What's another point of reflection? This is not quite the stab list, although we can do it now and to mix it up with the just thoughts and impressions. Um,
Yeah, let's please get to Garrett because, honey,
Garrett, I,
honey. First of all, I was just kind of like, we got this real, almost like too healthy, amicable relationship
mm-hmm,
after all the dirt that we done
right,
heard. Like
right,
she was on another level of enlightenment in terms of like
absolutely.
divorced spouses, you know, cooperating, getting along, co-parenting, and all that good stuff. Because I was like, I'm not hanging out with you if it don't pertain to my child, right? When they met up with the Joan and Miles, right, and
Mm-hmm,
they're actually joking about, you know, his foolery and getting caught. And
yeah,
you know, I loved when Miles threw him under the bus and was like, I told him not only was he going to get caught, that you were going to beat his ass and you were going to divorce him. He's like, I told him that was going to happen. But I was like, we would not be hanging out as a foursome. No, no. Come get your kid. I'm
right,
not staring daggers at you. I'm not poking the, you know, the voodoo doll that I had made, you know, by the elders in New Orleans. I'm not poking that when you come get your child. But in out, you know, like the fabulous foursome we might have been when we were still married. We're not doing that. No.
yeah. I I can see. I understood. I
Fine, I
understood
hold
her.
grudges.
You know, I hold grudges too. I guess what I understood them finding. Let me say this. Also, everybody, I'm gonna edit some of this stuttering out. I'm very tired, but I'm excited to talk about the book. But you're gonna hear me. My brain is moving slow. I understood them having a relationship that was amicable, and I think it was much more amicable for her. If it meant something different to him than it did to her. So
Yes, yes,
she
absolutely.
permitted him to be around, and she permitted him to make his jokes and the double entendre and the innuendo. And I think it began with, I beat that bitch's ass. I'm done now. Like I did what I needed to do. And there was probably a long period where he needed to give her 50 feet, but ultimately they had a daughter together, and so we have to figure out how to have some kind of conversation, even if I despise you as a person. And I think her that despising him morphed into, you know, accepting him, which I think then morphed into tolerating him, because the vibe that I got from it was, you know, you really here because of your daughter, and you just happen to know these friends, and we kind of came up together, and y'all want to celebrate me. But like, don't think that we would ever be across candlelight, or you would be here celebrating me by yourself. Like, you only allowed
Right.
to be here because they're here. Like, but I think if you would have asked him, he would have given you a very different definition of their relationship.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. And I think, you know, to something you said earlier, I too was very surprised at the way he handled things right? Because
Hmm.
what we had seen of him up to that point was okay. And I think Sloan said this point blank, right? That he was a, terrible husband, but great father. Okay, fine. And they had this amicable relationship. And yes, he was flirting, and they had the moment where she let him kiss her. I think that might have been after the wedding or whatever. But he was dating, right? One moment where he shows up to the house and he's flirting with her, and she's like, "You got a hickey on your neck? Are you kidding me? Like, are you
Right,
serious?
right,
Like,
right.
you're serious? Talk about, us get back together. You
It
show
was
up here
it
with
was
a hickey on
always
your neck,
you.
right?" It was like, boy, stop. So for him to, but I remind myself, emotions are not logical, right?
Hmm.
But his reaction, and that he took it all the way to Eli. So that's why I would say, you said that you thought Eli was, and you said villain might be too strong of a word, but I thought Garrett was worse than Eli, because there should have been a level of loyalty to her, um, in terms of her professional accomplishment, right? um, that he completely violated, because he went to the owner of the team. And I know that he said to her, I wasn't even thinking about that. I was thinking, I went to my boy and told him, you better get your son before I kill him over my wife. And I was just kind of like, yeah, but that's not good enough to me. Because at the end of the day, you knew that your ex-wife had broken this major barrier on your boy's team,
Hmm.
right? And I thought that spoke to just a level of immaturity on the part of Garrett that
Oh,
candidly we
definitely.
were seeing, right? We were seeing it, but I didn't realize it was as dangerous as it almost turned out
Yeah,
to
yeah,
be,
yeah.
right? Because to your point, the immaturity was obvious, but it seemed like harmless immaturity,
Absolutely.
right? And then we saw that immaturity actually quite dangerous,
Hmm.
because he, in terms of where he was in her life, he, in my opinion, then committed the ultimate betrayal. He couldn't
Hmm.
betray her in terms of marriage vows anymore, because they were no longer married, right? Couldn't
Hmm.
betray her in terms of like disrespecting her, because she didn't care. Like, she didn't want him back,
Right.
so him bringing another woman around or whatever the case may be. But to do what he did with respect to the team was the ultimate betrayal to me, because that was the one area where he could still do something, um, to hurt her, and he did,
Right.
and he did.
Yeah.
So
And I
even
think
when,
it, go ahead.
no, I was just gonna say, even when she was like, "I don't want to see you for another month," I was like, "A month?
Girl, year.
We being too
Eternity.
generous." Like, we ain't gotta talk. Baby girl got a car. She has a phone. She's
Right.
16. We ain't got. I don't need to. Yeah, yeah. That whole amicable co-parenting thing. Stay out my face forever, forever.
Well, and it also not I would dare not say this was part of her reason for keeping her relationship with Nate on the low and a little bit not not future focused. But I also feel like she she knew that he was a baby. It's one, men are
Mm-hmm.
all gung ho for forgiveness when they are the one that needs to be forgiven. But if the shoe is on the other
Yes.
foot, then of course they're outraged, then, or they're all for cheating when they're the one that cheats. But if they get cheated
Right.
on, now all is lost. And so she
Right.
knew that he was just like it's a perfect word, that he was very immature. And I think it came across that he still felt that he had some sense of ownership. Basically, even his interest in her was an indication to him of ownership.
Yes.
So the fact that
Yes.
I want you means that nobody else can have you, which
Yes.
is like
When he
absolutely
said,
not. Die in a fire.
yeah, when he referenced my house, in my house with my daughter,
Exactly.
she was like, "Excuse me, this house came to me in the divorce. Okay,
Right, right.
you're
And
playing yourself."
you, like, over and over again, you look ridiculous. And he gets his ass handed to him a little bit by Nate, which was another blow to his ego, which precipitates what he ultimately does. But
Yeah.
it really, to your point about them together being 85% unproblematic, they really did, the same as Will and Ramsey have external, and
Yes.
even the same as Tegan and Ambrose, having external issues be what challenges their relationship instead of what was internal. And for her, it was her ex-husband, and for him, it was his father. And having to grapple with that at different times over the course of the book, because and then they kind of converged toward the end. But yeah, Garrett was a deep down asshole, and I would like for him to be stabbed for sure.
Yes, yes, yes. We don't need him murdered for the sake of
No,
Madison, but
yeah, but
but
I mean, you know,
you know,
he can get poked a little bit, like you.
a little. I want blood flowing, right? I wanted blood flowing because I was just like, you have lost. You know, I always and I've seen this, you know, with friends and family and situations again, and I know I said this before about accountability being very important to me, right? But I've seen instances where people have allowed things to mess with their money, right? And I'm always like, don't let something mess with your money, right? Don't. I may compartmentalize too much, but very much of the view of you don't let things interfere with how you take care of yourself and your family, right? So you
Hmm.
do what you have to do to not put yourself in that situation. So again, with him saying, well, that's not what I was thinking, but I was like, but you still almost mess with your ex-wife's money,
Right,
right?
right.
And I would have a really, really hard time because it was nothing that he did that saved the situation from being completely disastrous.
Correct,
There was
correct.
nothing that he did to fix what he did, right?
Yep.
It was fixed and remedied and rectified through no contribution of his.
Hmm.
And that's one of those save your sorry, right? Because
Right.
you're sorry's not going to get it done.
Mm-mm.
Um and
And what would have been your plan if this had worked? Because now you have disgraced me on an international scale.
yep,
And so, where am I
yep,
supposed to work now? Because the whole argument about, not the whole, but a significant part of the argument about female or women coaches is the whole sexuality piece, you know, the
yep,
sexual harassment, not
yep,
even just, you know, competence in the game,
yeah,
but all of these concerns around being a distraction. We just want to focus
yep,
on the work. We just want to focus on the field. You know, and what if a player gets the wrong idea? What if, you know, a coach or some other staff person gets the wrong idea? And so
yep,
I have been able to keep my nose clean, you know, and that's probably the wrong phrase for that, but I've been able to keep my reputation clean, and I've been very
yep,
careful, very
mm-hmm,
intentional. There have been no
mm-hmm,
false steps, and you really tried to like fuck that all the way up. And then where was
yep,
I supposed to work then?
yeah,
So it was just like he
yeah.
really just raged out and just didn't give a shit.
No, exactly. Exactly. Which is why I think that would have been the one thing that I said to CCJ, no, I want her like she's way too zen about this. And I
Yeah,
mean, right, it's
she
not
took it easy on
she
him for
was
sure.
yeah, she was way too zen towards him about that because like I said, the mess cleanup, there was no contribution from meaningful contribution from him, right? He made the mess, he didn't do anything that would have cleaned it up.
Right.
And
He just came back with his tail between his legs, looking all
that's
dumb.
right. Yes, yes. So I love the scene right at the house, right, which of course sets all of this off. And Nate is like, yeah, what you gonna do, right? Like,
Exactly. If you don't get the fuck
what
on out of
what
here.
exactly are you going to do?
Right. Get your ass out of here somewhere. Stop wasting my goddamn time.
Exactly. And this is when Sloane says that Nate doesn't even, he brings her over to the couch and keeps his back turned to Garrett, right? He's not even worried about Garrett
Right.
running up on him. He's just kept his back turned. Nate was all man,
Yeah.
right?
And he was a
Without,
smooth operator.
he really was. There was no chest pounding. There
Mm-hmm.
was not, he wasn't constantly telling us, I'm a man, I'm a
There you
man, I'm a
go.
man. He
There
would
you go.
respond to her, right? He
Yep.
would respond to her, but he wasn't the pounding the chest, I'm a man, see me as a man. I think that he was comfortable enough in his own skin and confident enough in who he was that he understood he didn't have to keep proclaiming it, number one. And number two, he was basically like, I can show you better than I can tell you, in the best way possible, right?
Hmm.
Because normally when people say that, they mean it in
Right,
whoop
right,
yes,
right,
right?
right, right.
But I felt like Nate's attitude was, I can show you better than I can tell you, right?
Absolutely.
And just do what needs to be done. And even again, going back to the hospital, right? He doesn't say to her, he never said to her, see, I'm giving you certainty.
Right,
He just laid out, right?
right.
I did this, I did
He handled it.
you know, I knew you wouldn't have wanted this. I handled it. This is taken care of, this is taken care of, this is taken care of. See, right? He didn't kind of tie it up with the bow the way
Right.
someone a little bit more petty, not understanding
Absolutely.
the moment. And I think, you know, that was also reflective of his maturity, you know.
Even one of my favorite scenes when she is this camp and she asking for a little light orgasm.
Yes,
And she finally says to him, somehow she's trying to get him out of the room or tell him why they can't be there. I don't know, something. And she thinks he's leaving. And she says, okay,
yes,
I'm afraid to orgasm. She kind of blurts it out. And he was like, oh, you thought
yes,
I was leaving. Like, no, I'm just taking off my shoes.
right.
He really was a wartime, like you've been saying, a wartime partner. And the moment, even in the moment where she allowed herself to be not the most vulnerable, but certainly more vulnerable than she would have preferred. But I think by the time she's blurting out the truth to get him to, or to keep him in the room, I think by then she's in. She doesn't know she's in, but she's in. Because I think even
Right.
that's before the date, I think, but I'm not sure. But even then, he handles it. He comes and holds
Yes.
on to her. He's present. He makes her feel loved and attended to. And because she even says, like, once they start to have sex or he eating her out or something, and he says, I won't let anything happen to you. And she says, I had no reason to believe him. It was impossible for that to be true, but I held on to that because I
Yeah.
knew by this time, that he was one to be trusted.
Yeah. And you know, another detail that I appreciated about that particular scene was, number one, when she's like, you know, someone will see you,
Yes,
you know, whatever. And he's like, babe, I
I
took a
already handled that
shower,
too.
right?
Yep.
I thought he thought of everything,
Yes, he
right?
did.
He had literally thought of everything. Again, just a reminder that he was not some, age aside, he was not some wet behind the ears, got his
Mm-hmm.
first taste of you know, well seasoned snatch and lost his mind and
Exactly.
reckless and do whatever, right? When he said, I came up here, right, and met with my players so that I'd have cover for seeing you, but I came up here to see you, right?
Right.
I showered before I came to your room so that I can just go upstairs, dip out,
Mm-hmm.
no one's the wiser, you know. Thinking of all of those things to basically say, I have considered all of that,
Right.
right? I understand how we need to continue to move, and I have not forgotten
Yeah,
that.
and her surprise in that area, in terms of, like, so the way he handles the heart attack, and then the other things that he does, even once when Garrett is coming home early, and he's like, "Thank you, Coach Brooks. Thank you for letting me come
The
over so
duffel bag,
early,
yep.
the duffel bag, to discuss this and blah blah." I think she had it became clear to me as I continued to read that their encounters were not consistently in the context of their day to day. And we know that because at one point she says, you're supposed to be gone by now, close to the
Right,
beginning of the book.
right,
And so, because of the heart attack, he is there more and more and more, and he's able to show her that just because all we've been doing is weekends does not mean that I don't know what I'm doing during the week.
right,
And so
right,
it was just, because that, like you're saying, that thoughtfulness, but it also made sense for her to be surprised because she had never needed him in that way, and she had never
right,
seen him in that light. But once it
right.
becomes clear, she's showing her, like, I'm the mom, I'm the woman, I'm the ex-wife, I'm the one that thinks of these things. And he's like, no, baby, I got you, don't worry about it. Which I think, like,
Exactly.
helps her breathe a sigh of relief and kind of allow herself to get into him more and more.
I think, you know, if I can say, she had to have her moment where she finally admitted to herself, and she doesn't say it this way, but that with Nate, the audio and the video always matched,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
The audio and the video always matched. Nate was not saying one thing and doing another.
Exactly.
He said what he said, and then his actions aligned with what he had been saying all along. And I
Yes.
think, like I said, she doesn't word it that way, but she has that moment where she's just like, yeah, right. She calls it certainty or whatever the case may be. But I think it was just also this acknowledgement that he never sold her a false bill of goods, right?
Mm-hmm.
He was always consistent between his words and his actions.
Yes.
And you know, there's a lot to be said for that, because lots of people, right, regardless of age,
Mm-hmm.
you can't say that about them. And
Right.
yet you could say that about Nate. Um, and she just had to embrace that instead of continuing to project onto him, men your age want this.
Right.
So eventually you're going to want things that I have no interest in giving you. And it's only a matter of time, right? I'm waiting
Mm-hmm.
for that switch to flip. I'm waiting for you to have that moment. And instead, she was the one that had the life changing moment that resulted in the light bulb. And it was like, oh, wait, hold on.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
What else did you love?
Some of the ancillary stuff that I loved was her girl crew, especially Zora. Right, it was nice to
Mm-hmm. I
see
love
Zora,
Zora.
and this was
Zora
this
is
was
my favorite in the
before.
Antioch people.
Zora is a hoot, right? And I was glad to see, in High Stakes Holiday, when we get
That's it. Oh my God,
that,
yes.
right, that they're still together, and not only that, then they get engaged, and I was like, oh yeah, I love that.
Yes,
But
I love Zora.
When Zora, has that moment, when she, Joan, and Sloane are talking, and Zora's like, breaking down why Sloane was absolutely justified in feeling the way that she does and
Mm-hmm.
moving the way that she has been with respect to Nate. And everything she said was absolutely true,
Yeah.
and I think, it is important to have friends that are the more of the idealistic, which it sounded like Joan was,
Yeah.
as it is to have the Zoras in your life, right? The practical. Sometimes it can come across as pessimistic, but Zora was being very practical, right? And vindicating those feelings. But I also like that she was supportive when Sloane said, this is going to the next level, right? She didn't go so far as to say it'll never work. You're taking him out of the box that he should be in.
Yeah.
But candidly, Zora had her own moment, right?
But
Although it seemed,
go ahead.
I was gonna say, it seemed like where we meet Zora and
I know
in
his
this
last name is
story,
Norwood. I can't think of the man though. His first name.
Trey,
Trey.
it seems like she's not willing to fully own up to all that's happening between her and Trey either, right? So
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how that timeline, how the
Yeah, how it lines
passing
up.
interference timeline would overlap with Trey and Zora, since there's clearly something going on, but right, I don't think, if I'm reflecting on Zora's comments, I don't think they've gone there yet.
Yeah, I don't think so either.
Based
But
on her
it
comments.
completely lines up with her motivation because she runs into the same
Yes.
issue with Trey. Of,
Yes.
feeling
Yes.
like he's too young and you used to play
Yep.
video games and blah 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 blah
Yep.
blah.
Yep.
But yeah, I love them. After I can never think of anyone's name. But after Kingston and what's her name?
Asha. Asha.
Asha, Red. That's I wanted to say Raina, but it's Red, her nickname. After Kingston and Asha, Zora and Trey are definitely my favorite anti-up high stakes people. Um,
Mm-hmm.
for sure. And I loved how, anyway, we can't talk about that book because it's not a podcast about that book. So another thing that I loved about this book, we should actually do that one though. But we supposed to come up with list. So we're going to take a break because I don't think I understood committing 7 weeks in a row to this.
Right.
So
Right.
we're going
Right.
to take a break. We're going to come up with a list, and then we're going to have little pockets of podcasts when we have the energy and the time. So we may pick a
Yes.
series and do the series and then take a break and then pick something else and take a break. Um, so anyway, another scene that I really liked was Nate and her daughter. I
Yes.
loved
Yes. Yep.
him
Madison.
making
That was a great
Madison. I
scene.
was gonna say Mackenzie Madison. Him really trying earnestly to help her and connect with her, and him texting Cole on the side, trying to figure out the best
Yes.
thing to say. I loved him joning on the little boy hairline. Like, I know you ain't sad about this boy here. He can't even
Right.
get his shape up is a disaster. How are you concerned
Right.
about him?
Well, and
um,
I cackled when Cole was like, what exactly are you doing?
yes.
Because she's like, what's the context of
Who
this?
are you
Because I'm
talking
getting a
to?
little concerned.
Yeah, so that was cute. And then her giving him some advice really quick to help him help Madison. So yeah, I thought that was really cute. Another thing that I loved was when they go to London and he surprises her. They're gonna go to Brixton.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yep.
I thought that was very cute. Of course, we mentioned it, but it's also a scene that I really enjoy, which is the little light teeny weeny orgasm scene. Um,
Yes.
I actually loved how it opened. Him standing on her porch, waiting on her to open the door, and you just know she walking
Mm-hmm.
as slow as her body will allow her to walk. And this thing about her loving to make him wait.
Yeah.
Because I
Yeah.
could just see over the course of their relationship, him waiting in the hotel or him waiting, whatever, and she taking her sweet time. And he knows she's coming, but it's just her little it's certainly a part of the foreplay, and it's a little bit of a power play in this situation. And it's almost like if you need that power play, then you probably you in a little deeper than what you willing to admit. You
Right.
know what I mean?
Right.
But I enjoyed those scenes. I feel like they really gave the book life for me. How about you?
There were a couple other things on like my ancillary love list. I loved her relationship with Jordan,
Yes.
right? And even when the whole thing played out of his shoulder and she's watching him, and they have that
Mm.
honest conversation, but she's like, okay, all right, and then Cole goes to her and she's like, Cole, I will pay close attention, like it's not all in
Mm-hmm.
your head, I get it, but that there's only but so much I can do, right? And it
Right.
was, you hated the way that it played out, but that loyalty, right? And her walking that fine line because she cared about Jordan, the person, right? And they had this long-standing relationship from when he was at BSU, and it reminded me, taking us back to A Hint of Spice,
Yeah.
right? When Jordan is supportive of a woman, right, does and having nothing to do with a sexual relationship, the way he was so supportive of Cinnamon, right,
Yes.
and coming back where he's so supportive of Sloane because she was his coach and he
Mm-hmm.
respects her and reveres her and so on and so forth. And I know we talked about in our discussion of Parker and Rutt's story the evolution of that relationship. And so, just as we got the glimpses, from Rutt's perspective in this book, we got less,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
In this book, coming from Sloane's perspective, but she never took it personal, right? And yes, the point of that relationship was for us to see Rutt's transformation, but I loved how their relationship, in terms of from her perspective, where she's sitting in the bleachers and they have that conversation and they share
Mm-hmm.
the bit of mauve and
Yes.
whatnot, and they fist bump, talking, we'll be back next year. I just, the way that whole thing played out, I know we again talked about it with Rutt and Parker's story, but I loved when he was, what do you call it, like
Uh-huh.
mother hen, or auntie coach or something like that. But that term of endearment, I was like, oh, that's so adorable. And then you know, I also, and I said this earlier, right? That I liked that she did not drag her feet in terms of when she had her light bulb moment, letting Nate know.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think that would have pushed me to dislike her. Like,
Yeah.
okay, I was understanding. I got where you were coming from, but now, sis, what you doing? Right? Why are you letting weeks go by after you've had this light bulb moment instead of
Right.
getting your man? You
Right.
know, so I appreciated that, because I think we've seen in other stories where, and look, we like, as readers, right, we enjoy being taken through the ringer, is, you know, but you're watching a character and you're like, you've had this moment of reflection, what are you
What are
waiting
you
for?
waiting for? Yes.
You
Yes. Yes. Yes.
know.
Yes. Yes.
um let's not forget, so Landon reminded me of Clayton,
For
right?
sure.
Hoes need love and friends too, so and I also thought the Leia, side plot, I like that. And you had mentioned this before, how Leia was like, well, yeah, I'd have left me for Sloane Brooks too. Like,
Absolutely.
I can't
Yeah.
even. And then also Leia leveraging Nate to get the man she really wanted,
Yes.
right? Like,
She
please
gets
just
her
play
happily
along with
ever
me,
after.
right? Just play along with me so I can get him nice and jealous and I can get the D tonight. I thought
Right.
that was a cute little twist on the usual, now we've inserted a third person into the situation and what's going to happen with them. So yeah.
Yeah. No, I did. I enjoyed that too. And I almost it served its purpose in terms of, you know, Sloane pushes him to go out with Leia because I think it's in the bed after they've had sex that the girl friend requests him or
Yes.
somehow,
Yep.
and Sloane is like, "Oh,
Yep.
she's pretty," and Nate, and
Yep.
I just wanted to be like, "Girl, please stop," but okay.
Yes.
So
Agreed.
she pushes them together, sort of it, but Nate is never going to go along with it. He goes out with her once or something, but it's not real, and he tells her up front, like, this is not going to be nothing. But I still understood the addition of it in the book, and it was very satisfying when she goes back around and she has that moment with her, like you're saying, the best friend that she wants to be the boyfriend, um, or the friend that she wants to be the boyfriend.
Yes.
The
Yes.
other thing was, that I wanted to talk about. Oh, so separate from this, not related to Leia, but I'm just looking down at my notes that she Sloane runs Terrence Grant till he passes out,
Yes.
and
Yes.
Nate
Yes.
and Nate is like, "Why you do that to that man?" And
He's
she,
like, I know he's annoying, but he passed out, Sloan.
don't kill him, and
Nate,
she don't care.
right, right. She's like, I bet he won't question my authority no more.
Again, exactly. He can die on the field. I don't give a good goddamn. Like
She's like,
she,
listen, she's like, right, got the message, right? Like,
right? Why he ain't
Terrence
get it?
Grant is still being hard headed. Well, hard headed make a soft behind, right? That's what the
Exactly.
Southern Crows say. So,
Yes. No, that's exactly
she's
the
like, but did
point.
he
Rut.
die though?
Yes, he did not die, and I don't care. I wouldn't care if he
Right.
did. But she was like, Rut got it. Why he ain't got it? And so she's like, I don't
Exactly.
care. I don't care what's wrong with him. You go out there and see how you do it. I don't care. So,
Exactly. No, that was a great where again Nate is kind of like, I know he's annoying. I know that
hmm
no one likes him, but you ran him until he passed out. Like, they had to call the medic.
right. And she was like,
She's like,
did and
and
so
why
no,
are
I
you
love
telling me
that.
this?
Exactly. Why are we talking about? Can we talk about something that's meaningful? I don't want to talk about this.
Right. Right.
So I
Like,
love that.
and
Yes. What did you think about so before we get to that, I loved Cole and Jordan having the twins, and
oh
my
yes.
heart skipped a beat at the end when I was like, what's going is everything all right? And then we found out. So first we found out she's pregnant, and then towards the end we found out that it's twins. And
Yes.
that was beautiful, and kind of Jordan coming out and telling everybody. I thought that was very cute. Even him finding out that she was pregnant, and then the way that she finds out that he's dating Sloane, and then the way that he finds out
Yes.
that she's pregnant, and she's like, we're twinning. And even her comment
Yes.
to him, like, I stand, she's very like, I'm proud of
Right.
you.
Right, right. She's like, I didn't think you had it in you. I didn't
Yes.
think you were boss enough to pull Sloan
Mm-hmm.
Brooks. Like, okay. And in fact, I feel like one of the last lines of the book is actually kind of going back to Jordan and Cole, where Jordan's like, Coach, watch out. This twins running this
Yes,
family,
yes,
something
yes,
slick
yes,
like that.
yes, yes. Which definitely made me question. I really thought about like, are they gonna have kids? But then I talked to somebody about it, and they were like, "Girl, she got heart disease. She ain't getting pregnant." I was like, "True, true, true, true." Like, because pregnancy is hard on your heart. If you already got heart
Yeah.
problems, they be like, "Girl, you sure?"
Well, I
So
chuckled when she said, she was like, y'all, please. She's like, I already got my tits done. She's like, this kitchen is closed.
I know that's right, which is like makes so much sense to me for sure.
She's like, yeah, we're done. We're done
Yeah, we
here.
don't even get it into your mind because it's not going down. Yeah. Oh, what did you about the? I don't know if this is a love, but it's definitely something that again made sense and it lined up with her history and her just her life experience and potentially her insecurities when the photos of him and Leia get posted and he comes back to Thanksgiving and Sloane is kind of like off to herself and he
Yeah.
explains it. She's like, no, I already know it's not anything, but I still just needed a minute. Really
Yeah.
rang true to me.
Again, I thought that was grown woman, right?
Yeah.
To say to him, I needed to process, right? Because it
Mm-hmm.
triggered me and it brought some
Mm-hmm.
things back, but I know that's not you.
Yeah.
But and him having the moment of, baby, like, yes, and I need to be more mindful,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because who would have thought that on Thanksgiving Day,
Right.
but social media, right?
Right.
Where it's like it didn't have to be a tabloid. It's a regular person in a supermarket that was like, oh, I recognize him.
Exactly.
Let me take a photo. That happens all the time. We see that, right?
Yep.
So him recognizing, oh yeah, no,
Yeah. Let
right.
me be a little more
But
careful.
her, to your point, her being like, I know that's not what it was. I know it
Mm-hmm.
was not what it looked like, but it triggered me and I needed to have a moment to just process my feelings. Like just having the dialogue, because I think you can see that play out in other books where you're assuming that's what's happening, but no
Mm-hmm.
one's the same way you wanted certain words from her. This was a moment where I appreciated you were getting the words instead of just we're in her head and she's like, I
Right.
know that's not what it is, so I'm not going to say anything, and it's fine, it's fine, it's fine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Something that surprised me, which is not on the page, but it did surprise me somehow. Not somehow. I was on YouTube and I was watching, I think the Christina C. Jones most recent thing, the request line, or maybe I don't know. And but I somehow, it tells you another video. So I don't remember the name of it. If I can find it, I'll put it in the show notes. But maybe it was like five insecurities as an author or five something something. I don't know. But she was talking about how this was the least well received of the books that she's done for the Connecticut Kings. Um, and that surprised me because I thought
Huh.
it had all the elements. I didn't feel like it was missing anything for people to not like it, or at least to
Uh,
receive it less with less, I guess, to embrace it less than um
yeah.
some of the other ones that she had done.
Did she offer a theory as to why she thought that was, or
No, because in general she was talking about, at least not that I heard. In general, she was talking about like writing a series and people having expectations of the series and that being anxiety producing. I'm trying to right now,
mm,
I'm clicking around trying to see if I can find it, but if not, I'll find it later. But yeah, that surprised me. And I know we've talked about like readers and reactions and reviews, and I guess but to me it was a one-to-one romance. It was y'all gonna hear me clicking underneath this because I'm trying to find the thing while I'm talking, but um it 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 fit what she does so well. And so I don't
yeah,
know if it was um the lack of a breakup or the lack of a maybe if people felt like I
drama
don't
within
know.
the
Yeah,
couple?
but I felt like the drama was there. So that's why it was a little bit surprising for me. Okay, well, maybe it was what to do with self-doubt as an author. It might have been that one.
Okay.
But I'll
Okay.
put it in. I'm gonna watch it again and put it in the show notes to make sure that's the one I was watching. But yeah, I thought that was surprising to me that because I loved it. Like not that I
I
just
loved it
because I
too.
love it, other people gotta love it. But I guess I've been trying to figure out what's not to love. I think that's what I've been trying to figure out.
Yeah, maybe Sloane was. I wonder if there was a feeling that Sloane was a little too hard.
Could be.
Um, right. Um, so, and even in her vulnerability, that maybe she wasn't vulnerable enough for some people.
Yeah.
Um, so, because I'd be surprised if it was the May December, right? Because I think that many, obviously, CCJ's fan base are women, right? And in
Mm-hmm.
particular, Black women, and so I think more of us than not would be pumping our fists for this woman who's fabulous and fine and
Yeah.
successful and all these things, nabbing herself this fine, successful, intelligent, man who's
Exactly.
13 years younger. But
Mm-hmm.
I could see Sloane being a little too hard for some people.
Maybe
Um,
so.
Maybe a little too Ice Queen ish. And some folks feeling maybe even more than you did, right? That Nate was putting it all out there, and Sloane's kind of like, no, 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 I'm
Yeah.
keeping you in the boy toy box, right? So maybe that was part of it.
Yeah. It could be. It could be. Anything surprised you that we haven't talked about?
No, no, because the one surprise for me that I put in my notes was Garrett's handling of things,
Being a
right? Just because
jackass.
yeah, I didn't think that we had, based on what we had seen of him, I would have been that family member, like, I can't believe he did that,
Right.
right? I
Right.
would have been that family member, right? Like, I really can't believe he did that.
Mm-hmm.
But that was the only kind of surprise for me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Last question. What questions do you still have?
I would love to know, like, I don't remember if it's in Love's encroachment or if it's in offensive formation, but we knew, right? Obviously, Sloan is still on the staff, right? She's got her wide receivers and whatnot. Um, we didn't get a definitive confirmation that they're still going, but the assumption is they're still going strong. And are they talking about marriage, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Um, how has that come up or not? Because there was, he had joked with her about being Madison's stepfather, right? And then he he joked with someone else, I felt
Mm-hmm.
like, about that Madison could babysit Emma or something like
Right.
that,
No,
right? He
yeah,
was
he
like, she
did.
could,
Yeah.
um so I think I would just want to know that they're continuing to, we know they're still together, right? I have no question about whether or not they're still together. I would just be curious of have they taken it to the next level of engagement, or are they still
Right.
kind of, hanging out? Either way is fine, right? Either way is fine. Now that you mentioned it, and I would love to know how Eli is doing,
Mm-hmm.
right? Since it went from being the non-aggressive to very aggressive cancer, and right, again, our
Right.
assumption is that he's fine. And then a side question, because I don't know that, is it clear to you what Jordan and Cole have?
No, I don't. I would have to
Okay,
go back and
okay.
look. I know it's two
Yeah, I
children, but I
wasn't
don't think
sure
we
if
know
it
what
was
kind.
clear. Right. Yeah, I wasn't sure if it was clear what they have, right? If they've got
Yeah.
fraternal or identical, right? Do they have two
Right.
boys, two girls?
Yeah.
That wasn't clear to me.
Yeah. I don't think
So,
we get that. Um,
and then is Madison at BSU, right? That would be like a truly side
which yes,
kind of,
but full, but
right?
still love for sure.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um,
But no, I thoroughly enjoyed it. I thoroughly enjoyed this book. And going back to the very beginning, I think it's speaks to that I was as engaged and interested. I've read the book more than once, right?
Yeah.
So this was not a couple that I was like, oh, that's fine, it's lovely, and I don't need to ever read their story again. I
Right.
enjoy the story again, reading it again in preparation for our conversation, just so that if there were certain nuances that we might
Mm-hmm.
want to discuss, right? And enjoyed it all over again. The witty dialogue, right? The snappy
Definitely.
one-liners, all of that CCJ delivers so effortlessly and
Mm-hmm.
flawlessly in all of her work. So
And
well
seeing
done.
her, definitely well done. And I think of all the things, even though I was hard on her at the beginning of the podcast, I think I enjoyed seeing her come around.
Yep.
It was as much as my little heart was hurting when she was not giving Nate the time of day, the energy that he deserved. Right from the gate, I appreciated that. I appreciated seeing her turn in his direction in a very unapologetic way. As
Yeah.
much as she could, given the things that she had to be very much concerned about.
And also, she didn't mistreat him, right? At
Mm-mm.
least not what we saw.
Mm-hmm.
She might not have treated him the way Teen Nate wanted him to treat her,
Right.
wanted her to treat him, but
Mm-hmm.
she didn't mistreat him, right? And it didn't seem as if he felt like he was being mistreated, um, as opposed to he's like, you're not seeing all that we could be.
Right.
Um, but it didn't come across as, you don't appreciate me, you
Right.
don't value me, you are mistreating me. I
And
thought
not
that was
even
a
that you
fine
don't
line.
love me. I think he knew that she loved him.
Yes, agreed.
He wanted to hear
Agreed.
her say it, but I think
Yeah,
he knew.
yeah, yeah.
And sometimes, so when I was talking about that before, and then gosh, I can't believe we've been, but I think we've covered everything probably that we intend to cover. But, and listeners, I do believe that y'all gonna get this podcast raw. So I hope y'all will just receive it the way that I send it, with love. But I don't think I'm gonna edit this, and I'm tired. But um, it reminded me of Mirror, who is my favorite um, Mason.
Hmm.
And in his interaction with Ireland, I think that's how you say it, or Ireland, I don't know. But in his interaction
I
with her,
pronounced it in my head Ireland.
me too. So I think maybe that's what it
Yeah,
is. I hope that's what it is. But anyway, in his interaction with her, eventually Mahogany says to her, "You need to say it." And what
yeah,
Ireland says to him when she comes to his apartment, "I need you to say the words." So that's
yeah,
kind of where I was with Sloane toward Nate. I needed her to say the words, and he never puts it to her that way. But at least that was what I was hoping she would hurry up and do. But she
yeah,
eventually does.
yeah.
Yeah, she eventually
She
does.
gets there. She gets there.
She does.
And she
So
didn't wait to the last 10 pages of the book to get there
no, she
either. So,
didn't. She didn't. So we can't do Ezra next because I need to take a break, and then I need to finish another book. And once I finish that, so we can do Ezra towards, September, October to November, something like that. What do you want to do next? Do you think?
ooh, that's a good question. Let me think about that.
All
Exactly.
right, ma'am. Thank you so much. This
All
was a
right,
lot of
darling.
fun. I appreciate it.
All
Okay.
right. Bye bye.
Bye.